Welcome to Boswell Book Company and Urban Ecology Center's virtual event series. It is 4,331 days that Boswell has been in business. And tonight we are super excited to be hosting our collaboration with Urban Ecology Center and the author, Anders Morley, the author of This Land of Snow, A Journey Across the North in Winter. We are very honored tonight to be having Olivia Raasch, Community Programs Educator and Volunteer Coordinator of the Urban Ecology Center, doing the conversation. So welcome, Olivia. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you. I'm so excited to be here and be in conversation with Anders, and really looking forward to this event. So again, my name is Olivia Raasch. I work for the Urban Ecology Center as a Community Programs Educator and Volunteer Coordinator. And I'm really excited to introduce Anders Morley, author of This Land of Snow, A Journey Across the North in Winter. I'm just so excited to get into conversation about the book and a couple of recurring themes that we kind of relate to at the Urban Ecology Center as well. And Anders Morley is from New Hampshire, but you're coming to us live from Italy, am I correct?
Yes.
And what time is it over there?
It's 2 a.m.
Ooh, oh man, dedication. Well, thank you for being live with us so well, early or late, depending on how you look at it.
Thank you. All right, so thank you first of all for that introduction, Olivia, and thank you for the opportunity, Daniel and Boswell Books, to talk to an audience in Milwaukee and wherever you're coming from tonight. So I'm here, as Daniel and Olivia both mentioned, to talk about my book, This Land of Snow, Journey Across the North in Winter, which is published by Mountaineers Books. It came out this past fall. So I'm eager to get into conversation with Olivia, but I just want to give you sort of a sense of context and an overview of the book. So the Land of Snow is Canada, northwestern Canada in particular. And in the winter of 2012 and 13, I spent the course of that entire winter traveling on cross-country skis from Prince Rupert, British Columbia, which is the northwesternmost town on the Pacific, the northernmost town on the Pacific in Canada, due east to central Manitoba. And the book is a description of the journey, but as much as a description of a place, it's also a description of the season, winter. So those two things, really, skiing across the season and skiing across the place, are important. And then on another level, of course, it's a memoir. So there are things happening in my life that I talk about, and that, believe it or not, winter helps me to understand. So that's the gist of the book. I want to do, before we jump into the conversation, I want to do to read two short passages for you. The first passage is from early in the book, and I'm talking about kind of the origins of the journey and what made me want to decide to take a journey like this and to live outside for an entire winter in a tent and be cold all the time. So I've been living in Italy at the time for a decade, close to a decade. And it was kind of homesick, and there were a number of things, but I'd been a skier all my life, and I loved being outside. And so let me just read this a little bit for you. When I hatched the idea of traveling across a season and a continent, one of the things I was genuinely interested in was how people made lives in places where winters were long. I had settled on the Boreal Forest of subarctic Canada as the perfect laboratory for my curiosity. The Boreal Forest, alternatively called the taiga or the snow forest, is the evergreen ecosystem, sometimes sprinkled with birch or aspen, that girdles the northern hemisphere between roughly 50 and 70 degrees of latitude. In my mind, it represented the space where wilderness and civilization met to negotiate their differences. To the north were the barrens and the tundra. To the south were the prairies or northern hardwood forests. It was a place where you could travel for weeks without seeing another person, but also a place where there were modest-sized communities linked together by single-lane roads, which sometimes saw no traffic for days. It was home to a spread out population of Canada's First Nations, and home as well to bears, moose, caribou, wolves, and millions of smaller fur-bearing creatures that historically made it the heart muscle of the Canadian fur trade. The rivers of the Precambrian Canadian Shield, the exposed geologic backbone of the North American continent, once pulsed with the canoes of voyageurs, the rugged French-Canadian couriers of the Hudson's Bay and Northwest companies, which were the key players of the trade. Small farms poked the southern edges, hemming off tiny fragments of the endless forest with fences, but mostly the land was too cold and nutrient poor for agriculture. Had I been seeking only solitude, I would have set my sights from the beginning not on this peopled wilderness of the near north, but on the far north, where population is so sparse that for a traveler on foot, the land is effectively empty. Nevertheless, by late summer of 2012, a colleague could suggest that my reductive thinking habit was making me into a misanthrope and perhaps not be far off the mark. So that last sentence then connects to something I'm talking about in the context, but it becomes a larger theme in the book. And then quickly, just to give you a sense of my moving over the land in the wintertime, I want to read another short passage. This one is set, so you have to imagine I'm skiing across northern Saskatchewan at this point. And northern Saskatchewan is a place that is dotted with tens and tens of thousands of lakes. It's on the Canadian Shield, so you've got this shallow bedrock and water just pools everywhere. And of course, it's all frozen in the wintertime. Where I'm going to start reading, I've just come through a really terrifying storm, and the storm has kind of blown the wind behind the storm has finally blown the storm out of the way, and the sky just opens up above me. The north wind blew so hard that it had pushed the last of the clouds out of the way by the time I hit my stride. It was as if a curtain had been whisked open by the sharp tug of a hidden stagehand. Now the late afternoon sunlight saturated the atmosphere. The sky was a vibrant, even blue, and the view to the far side of the lake was so clear it looked like I could touch it. If I kept a fast pace and didn't wander off course, I could put the 5 miles behind me before dark. Then I wasn't sure how far I would have to go to L'Orange, but I decided I would call my contacts from the other side to let them know I was all right. The wind hit me and I leaned forward into space. There were moments when it felt like I, the only thing different on this vast expanse of sameness, could be lifted off the planet and sent unremembered into orbit. I skied as fast as I could. The sunlight on the snow was blinding, and I was glad I had my glacier glasses. Long, streaming drifts spread out for miles on all sides. The wind kept up so forcefully out of the north, along the 5-mile expanse of lake in that direction, that I imagined Boreas somewhere up there with cheeks inflated like you see him on old maps, blowing his lungs out. When after an hour or two I approached a point on the eastern shore, I saw a small dog jumping around in the snow. It appeared to be playing, but I couldn't see any other sign of life. Then a human form slid out from the cover of the trees. The fluidity of the movement immediately betrayed a skier. I had traveled hundreds of miles, and this was the first skier I'd seen on the trail. Whoever it was, he or she was skiing toward me now, with the little black and white dog running along behind. We approached each other in the snowmobile track and then came up alongside as if we were going to pass. The other skier was a man of about 40. "I'm Dave," he said suddenly. "Figured you might be," I said. "I'm Anders." Dave Fast and I had written back and forth a few times, and now we pulled off our mitts to shake hands. He turned around and we headed towards land. We skied on to the rolling trail as the last of the sunlight was fading, but before its warmth had gone completely, Dave stopped and took out a thermos of tea. He offered me a cup. While I sipped the tea, he held out an apple and said, "How goes the scurvy?" So that's what the book reads like. So I think if we there we go.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that selection from your book with us. And I think that those passages that you read will definitely be in some deeper conversation about some of those themes, including winter ecology, solitude, and some of those relationships that you developed as part of your journey. And with that, my first question kind of leads into when we think about nature, and it's not so much a mindset of like, what's your opinion of nature? What do you think of nature? We kind of all have a relationship with nature, and some people are deeply involved in their relationship, and others don't know nature that well for various different reasons. So you personally, what was your relationship like to nature before your journey, and did that change at all after your journey?
Yeah, well, I think of myself as someone who's always had a very close relationship to nature. I grew up in kind of a semi-rural place in New Hampshire, in the middle of the woods, and I spent all my time as a kid running around in the woods and jumping in streams and doing that kind of thing, cross-country skiing in the winter time. So in that way, I was very immersed. Let's say I was very immersed in nature, and I consciously liked being immersed in the natural world. I also, the school I went to, this it was a public school, but it was sort of an alternative public school that was very ecologically oriented. And I think that sort of reinforced a natural affinity. And then in terms of how my relationship to nature changed, like I expected it. So when I mentioned that when I embarked on the journey, I had been living in Italy for a long time, in a city in Italy, and Italy is a pretty densely populated place. And so I was there was an element of homesickness and wanting to get back to places where there was more elbow room and where there were, trees and lakes and whatnot. And so I kind of expected the journey to be, I thought that it would just kind of reinforce the way that I felt about nature, but it actually didn't. It actually changed things, because I think that you mentioned solitude. I think that I was so, I was in places that were pretty sparse. I mean, there are far more sparsely populated places, but if you're traveling on foot, everything is farther away. And I was alone so much of the time, and there were other factors too. But I came to realize, not that I didn't like, not that I still didn't, have this strong feeling for nature, but that I actually kind of liked cities and, groups of people around me, and things that we don't necessarily associate with nature, but also realize that nature is in those places in different ways. When you think about nature, there's kind of a rural bias, I think.
Yeah.
Often, which is not really fair.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we think about, we call ourselves the Urban Ecology Center, and finding those places and spaces in nature that are in the city where we can go outside and enjoy nature. Absolutely. And I know we might conversate a little bit about that a little later. But a big piece of that you talked about was solitude. And I think a lot of people have had to recently, with the pandemic, experience a little bit more solitude than we've been used to with quarantine. And do you think that your experience at all affected you during quarantine, since you had that time to kind of reflect and get to know yourself better within nature? Did that affect you at all during quarantine?
Tricky. So I think that kind of temperamentally, I'm pretty well suited to quarantine. I mean, that's to say, quarantine where I live in New Hampshire, which is in a small town where quarantine is. We never had a strict lockdown like you had in cities, and so I could always go out for walks and things like that. And in terms of the solitude part of it, being alone, I live alone most of the time, and I'm a freelance writer, so I work from home, so I'm pretty used to the solitude of it. But I did experience a bit, so now, as I mentioned, I'm in Italy. I'm actually in the city of Bergamo, which was kind of like the first big outbreak of COVID in the West, you may remember. And I guess we're kind of in the third wave of COVID now, and so we've kind of go in and out of lockdowns with varying degrees of strictness. So since being here the last couple of months, I've been a couple of times on not gone outside for a couple of weeks at a time.
Mhm. I think a lot of people have kind of reinforced their relationships with nature due to COVID. I know at least we've seen a huge increase at our parks in people that have started to come outside and go on hikes and enjoying nature when you're kind of trapped inside. And the only option that we really did have was to go outside, and it's the safest option with all the fresh air and the space. A lot easier to social distance outside, that's for sure. But yeah, so we really noticed those increase in numbers, and I think that people were finding solace being outdoors in some ways that may be comparable to some of those realizations that you came upon during your journey, and a little bit of self-discovery as well, which I guess would field into my next question. What are some things that you learned about yourself? I guess not giving too much away because we don't want to spoil the book, which is why I'm trying to field my questions carefully. But yeah, what are some of the things that you discovered about yourself? Because we know that when people go outside into nature, that is a place where we can really reflect on who we are and have that time to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this connects to what I said before, but and it's I think it's a pretty common experience for if you've read other memoirs by people who've spent lots of time in the wilderness, is that you realize how important other people are to you and how meaningful other human relationships are. And whenever I would come into a town, I would find myself seeking out like the warmth of other human beings. And that wasn't a totally new discovery, but in the period leading up to the journey, well, as I mentioned in that first reading, I was kind of like becoming a bit of a misanthrope, I think, just because there was kind of this contrast between what I wanted to do and the shape my life had taken at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think changes along those lines, like I realized that being having that sort of social aspect of my life, like actively seeking out other people and caring about people, not like I didn't before, but it just became something that I was much more consciously aware of.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like a lot of people probably resonate with that same thought.
Yeah.
One thing that I know was definitely on my mind and other people may be curious about is how did you prepare? How do you go about preparing for such a long and testing journey that you went on? What did it take to get ready for that?
Yeah. There was a lot of work, and it was kind of tricky because, as I said, I was living in Italy, so on a different continent at the time. And with a winter journey, there's only so much you can do in terms of actual like training kind of preparation, because if I was going to spend the whole winter outside, that means that like the season preceding the journey itself is summer and then early fall, so you can't practice winter things in those seasons.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of abstract stuff, I spent hundreds of hours poring over maps. So I would download these digitized geographical survey maps, hundreds of them, to sort of plan inch by inch my way across Canada. And then I was in the States the summer before setting off, and so I did lots of sort of getting gear together and dehydrating food that I would take with me, or that I would send to myself, at supply drops along the way.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the preparation, hundreds of hours, was just study of maps, study of like things that I had a bit of experience with, but I wanted to know more about, like winter camping techniques and sort of things about weather and navigation and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So I did do a bit of training. Like I said, the Alps are not far from where I live in Italy, and so the winter before going, I would do things like I had here I just had my summer sleeping bag, and so I would like go up into the mountains with my summer sleeping bag in the winter and sort of train myself to sleep
Oh,
you know,
wow.
shivering, which was a bit overkill. 'Cause then when I had a much, I had a proper winter sleeping bag when I actually went, and so I was never cold while I slept. But anyway, yeah. So a mix of things.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Well, I can't imagine that. Like if my house is too cold, I can't sleep. So I can't imagine what that was like for you. Speaking of maps, did you have a photo to share with us of like the path you took? I think it'd be really cool if folks could see like how incredibly long and amazing that journey you took was. I know you do also have a photo of it in your book, I think in the first couple pages.
This is the same map that's in the
Oh,
beginning of the book.
awesome.
Let me put it on full screen for you. Okay, so what you're looking at is Western Canada. And as you can see the corresponding U.S. states along the bottom of the map, Pacific Ocean on the left. And so I actually initially, and I mentioned this in the book, my initial idea was to try and ski all the way across Canada from one ocean to the other, which very quickly proved to be far too ambitious. And I wanted to kind of stick in this area of the Boreal Forest, sort of the evergreen northern forest, basically skiing along the 55th parallel. So that straight line that kind of intersects my track at various places is the 55th parallel. To give you an idea of how far north this is, it's not like way up, but the U.S.-Canada border is at the 49th parallel. And so this is between 400 and 500 miles up into Canada. And as I mentioned in that first reading, there are no large cities really along. You can see that in the middle, I dip down into Edmonton, which is by far the largest city that I came to. But mostly there's small towns along the way, and like sometimes I would ski for a few days or even a week between one town and another. And mixed terrain. Actually, I can to give you an idea. Let me just skip ahead. I have a couple of pictures here of the terrain since we're here. So this is here just for curiosity. People who are not cross country skiers you may wonder, but how can you ski across mountains, go up and down? So skiers use these things called climbing skins, which are these pieces of fabric that have adhesive material on them, and they stick to the bottom of the skis. And the nap is such that the fibers are oriented backwards, so that if you're skiing uphill, you slide. But if gravity pushes back down on you, these fibers dig into the snow so that you have traction when you're skiing uphill. This is what my camp would look like on a normal night. And then here, so the terrain was mixed. So in the beginning, I had to cross a mountain range called the Coast Mountains, which, if you know your Pacific Northwest geography in the U.S., the Cascades are the mountains in Oregon and in Washington. And then when they go up into Canada, they become known as the Coast Mountains. So like I would, this was the kind of thing that it passes between mountains like this. And then later it became kind of the opposite. So here I'm in Saskatchewan on a lake. And on this particular lake, I crossed a 22-mile section of lake. And that's my backtrack. It's because I was hauling a sled, so it could cover up the two ski tracks and make a single track. And just to give you a sense of scale, that thin black line you see on the horizon is an island. It's not the mainland. And then here, this is another picture of, there are various characters I met along the way. And so this was a guy who lived in this kind of primitive log cabin, and this was his kitchen. It was just a wood stove. He had running water only in the bathroom. He didn't have like a kitchen sink or anything like that. It was pretty basic.
Thank you for showing us that. I think seeing those pictures and like putting it together with the story, and like, because you hear and read these things that you were going through and seeing, and to see it visually that way is really incredible. And I think a lot of people would see that and think, wow, I don't think I could do that. I know I'm one of those people like, wow, that's amazing. And before your journey, obviously you probably had some fears and things you were a little worried about. and people would have to read the book, and obviously they, you know, you'd had things happen and things that put your journey at risk or really put you at risk. But before your journey, what were some of the thoughts and fears that you had about embarking?
It's an interesting question. I mean, your initial remark, like, "Wow," you see that and you think, "Wow, I can do that." That's I kind of think that too when I see pictures now, or when I, you know, think about moments in the journey. You know, but that's with the benefit of hindsight. I think that going into it, I was much more sort of rash about it. You know, it's easy to think about doing these things when you're at home, you know, in a comfortable house with the heat on, and so forth. So your question was about how sorry, about how it defied my expectations. Like,
yeah, like what were you expecting? Like, because obviously we know, you know, that could be some things that would pop up that would make your journey difficult or be afraid of. So what were some of those things that you thought about before?
yeah, so I think the biggest fear, I almost said believe it or not, but I mean, I guess it's kind of a normal fear, but to me, it's, in retrospect, it seems kind of silly compared to the other things that I should have been afraid of. My biggest fear was grizzlies, because I knew that I was starting in the Northwest. And it's kind of, you know, people say grizzly, you know, bears hibernate in the winter. Why were you scared? But in the, you know, in the Northwest, it's pretty mild for about 100 miles in from the coast. It doesn't really snow. So at the beginning I had to walk. And so the bears don't really hibernate, you know, truly. And so that was a concern. But once I was actually on the trail, it kind of faded from my thoughts, because there were so many other things to think about. You know, just it's hard to imagine. And it's obviously, I was a person who'd been skiing my whole life, and I'd done a fair amount of winter camping, and, you know, spent lots of time in the outdoors. But there's just, you know, the spending all your time, practically all your time outside in the winter in a place that's, you know, very cold, is extremely difficult to imagine. And so, like, it just becomes all consuming. All your thoughts or all your actions, everything, you know, every little bit of energy you have goes towards staying warm, which basically means moving all the time. So you're constantly in movement. You don't really have time to stop and think about things. So I guess that's actually kind of one thing. Another thing would be that point about not being able to think. So I thought this was me kind of a contemplative journey, you know, where it'd be like walking along and thinking thoughts like Wordsworth or something. But it wasn't really, I mean, there were moments of contemplation, but they were mostly like in my tent at night when I was warm and having dinner.
Or actually have a second to like think about the day that you just had.
or when I, you know, came to a town and met some people who invited me to stay in their house, and I had a few days of warmth. And so, like, lots of the thinking I did about the journey that's in the book came afterwards, because, you know, every day out there skiing, there wasn't much room for that. And so that was, you know, something different from what I expected. I could never have imagined like just being so engaged all the time, like every, you know, fiber of my mind and body was just constantly engaged when I wasn't sleeping. There was no relaxation.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine. And I wanted to use this time to remind people that are watching, if you have any questions while Anders and I are having the conversation and I'm asking him some of my own questions, we'd love to have some of your questions. Just throw them into the chat and we can integrate that into our conversation as well. So you did talk about some of those relationships, and that's amazing, you know, that you had folks that were willing to help you out during your journey. And I know some of those moments and people that you met were really pivotal in the journey that you had. And how did those relationships overall affect your journey, without giving anything away, I guess? How did some of those relationships affect your journey and things that you still think about post?
Yeah. So that the important lesson that I talked about earlier of valuing, human relationships. A huge part of that was from, actual human relationships that I made along the way. So it was pretty amazing to be out in these places. Like, the book, as you know, is populated with people who I just met by chance along the way, who's, sometimes within seconds of having met them, they would be inviting me to stay in their homes. And so I made, in some of those people, I made a really close connection with quite quickly. And then, it kind of, you always think you're going to stay in touch with these people, and then you don't, and just because there are so many things going on. But a few of them have remained close friends. I think in particular, the people that could kind of identify with what I was doing, and that might, it might be possible for them to imagine to do something like I was doing themselves. Like, those are the kind. Obviously, you just have more in common with those kinds of people.
Yeah. And I think that that also reminds me just of how within the Urban Ecology Center, we kind of have our mission statement is that we bring people in urban areas, together, and we connect people in cities to nature and to each other. And a lot of times people that do share those common interests, such as skiing or other aspects of being in nature, can find that common ground within, those areas. And I know that a couple of the characters in your book shared that experience with you, and were avid skiers and, doing those types of paths as well. So I definitely see what you mean, and sharing those common values and within that aspect, just because I see folks all the time, just within the city, that can make those connections through that as well.
Yeah. And I mean, skiing in particular, this is not just skiing, but skiing is kind of this niche activity, cross-country skiing, I should say. It's kind of a strange thing. Like, you don't see people cross-country skiing all the time. Some places, but so like like in that second bit I read there, that was the only time I ever saw a person cross-country skiing, like when I was actually traveling.
Yeah.
As you know, I met a few other people thanks to cross-country skiing, who I'd reached out to people beforehand using cross-country ski clubs. Like, I would, find their email address and then write and say, I'm going to be traveling through this area. Do you know anyone who might sort of want to meet, just to have sort of contact along the way?
Mm-hmm.
And so then we go, like in one of those cases, this person took me to their local ski club and like kind of skied in the track around, like doing loops through the woods, which felt very artificial to me, of course, because I
love it.
But it was fun, and I met people that way.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Cross-country skiing is well, I think we'll probably talk about this later, but it's just, yeah, it's a great activity because it can be done pretty much, and all you need is snow, really. Snow and a little bit of open space, and skis, of course.
Right. And I see that we have a question from Aaron in the comments. Do you still cross-country ski? And if so, what's the furthest you skied since the journey? And do you still like skiing? Or did you chuck your skis and decide to never ever put them on again?
That's a good question. It sounds like someone who understands what happens in the head of a person that does something like this. I do still ski cross country, and I probably actually enjoy it even more, which is not to say that I would do something like this again. The farthest I've skied since the journey, I haven't made any overnight cross-country ski trips since the journey, put it that way. I don't know, I've probably had 20-mile days or something like that, but then I would go home and sleep in a bed at night. So yes, but I still do love skiing, and I never thought that it would break my skis or something like that, and never do it again.
just do away with them forever.
There's a little story in the book about that, actually. About it's sort of a myth in New Hampshire it's actually created by my father. I found out later in life, and it's because a guy on the trail asked me that same question, whether, you know, I thought I would still like skiing when I got to the end of the journey.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm seeing the question and answers in the section here, Tim. And I mean, thinking about like after your journey, of course, it's like, oh, would you want to be done with the skis? But when I was also thinking about, was there any, points during your journey where you were just like, man, I don't think I can keep doing this?
Yeah, there were. Well, there were, but not as many as, thinking about it now. I would expect there to have been, like, on shorter journeys and, in less difficult circumstances. I've had lots of moments like that. Here again, it was just like I said a moment ago, just the fact that you're so consumed with the present that it's hard to, like, that. You have to be thinking about the future to do that.
Right.
So you don't get a lot of opportunities. But there were a few times, and all of them were like on extremely cold days when it, like, just, savagely cold, like, it was like having daggers stabbed into your hands and feet. And you're sort of fighting with, rolling your tent up early in the morning. And you have, a few minutes where I remember thinking about, like, at one point, if someone, just magically appeared here in the middle of this lake and said, "I'll take you home right now," I would go without even a second thought.
If you could click your heels 3 times or something like that. As if you could click your heels 3 times.
Exactly. But as soon as I got, like, in all of those cases, as soon as I got skiing again, like, I was underway and started to warm up and feel energized, then it quickly went away. Which is, it's quite strange, actually, thinking back on it, that it was like that. It happened so seldom.
I think you have had a lot of motivation to keep going, and we're certainly glad you did, because now we have this awesome story to read about it. So we have another question in the comments from Susan or Suzanne. My memory may be inaccurate, but I don't recall any moments in the book that you mentioned concern about frostbite. Was it ever a serious concern?
I mean, it was a concern, of course, in that, I was aware of the possibility of frostbite. But because it was a concern going into it, I was pretty well prepared in terms of equipment and all of that kind of thing. I was very well prepared, and I knew that I had to be moving all the time. Mm-hmm. Like I just said, with those moments when I thought about giving up, like, those would have been the moments where it was closest that, the closest I came to frostbite, like fingers just stinging. But, I knew that the important thing is to keep moving, and that it wasn't like I wasn't cold in a situation where I couldn't move, or like I was, trapped or something like that. It was something that I knew I was going to power through eventually, but I knew that there would be like a half an hour of intense pain or whatever. So I never had any actual concerns that I would, like, there were no moments where I thought I'm risking frostbite right now.
Awesome question. I'm going to take another question. It says, from Kimberly, do you ever participate in cross-country ski distance races like apologize if I'm going to butcher this name, Birkenbiener? Was that pretty close? Okay. So much camaraderie over the course of 55 kilometers or kilometers, although that is a very brief ski compared to yours.
Yeah, but it's all at once. Yeah, it's funny you should mention the Birkebeiner. I have participated in exactly 2 cross-country ski races in my life, and one of which was the Birkebeiner, the actual Birkebeiner, which is for those of you who don't know, which is probably most of you, the Birkebeiner is a very long-standing ski race in Norway, eastern Norway. And it's 54, 55 kilometers long, and it's over, you know, low mountain pass. And one of the distinctive characteristics of the race is that you have to carry weight with you, which, you know, usually you're going for lightness, but so here you have to have a backpack with like, I think it's like 2.5 or 3 kilograms, so, you know, 7 or 8 pounds, not a lot of weight. But so actually in the year before, the winter before going on my journey, I mentioned I was living in Italy. So, you know, I just got like a low cost 2.5 hour flight up to Norway. And I know some people in Norway because my brother, long time ago in high school, was a foreign exchange student in Norway. And so I had been there a few times. Part of my obsession with cross-country skiing actually has to do with like a love of Norway. But there's a bit of that in the book too. But anyway, to answer your question, yes, I've skied the Birkebeiner. That's one of only 2 races that I have skied. And because the person who asked the question said that you know, that I've skied much longer. Yes, but that's you know, it's not as in, you know, I'm not racing anyone when I'm out there skiing alone. I guess that's the big difference.
Awesome, thank you. And at the Urban Ecology Center, we do have ski programs and stuff like that. If anyone's ever interested in, if you're a beginning skier or you are experienced skier and just want to get together with a group of people who also like to ski, we do have opportunities like that. If you go to our website to see that. And also if you are a member, you can borrow skis and an assortment of other winter equipment anytime. So we know that, again, we talked about that aspect there. Kimberly talked about camaraderie and how we talked about how those activities do bring people, tend to bring people together. So what is it specifically about skiing for you? Because you could just go on a hike or hop on some snowshoes or anything. What is it specifically about skiing in nature in that lens that kind of does it for you?
Yeah. So I say also in the book, early in the book, that for me, like I don't, you know, I said I've been in a couple of races, but for the most part, skiing when I was a kid, it was just kind of the way that I, you know, walked around in the woods in the wintertime, because it's easier to move around on skis. So for me, skiing is like walking in the winter, and I love walking. But more particularly about relating to the natural world in winter, I think skiing is, and there's a lot of this kind of thing in the book, and it might sound a bit cranky, but skiing is like, it's kind of a way of relating to the winter environment in a way that's more harmonious than some of the ways in which we relate to the winter environment. Like, you know, if you think about how we move around in the winter, you know, we usually spend a tremendous amount of energy moving the snow out of the way so then we can walk, you know, in the space that we've cleared. Whereas skiing actually uses, you know, winter and the properties of snow. Mm-hmm. So you float over the top of the snow and you take advantage of the fact that snow is slippery to move more quickly and quietly. You know, skiing was initially used for hunting in, you know, in Scandinavia and Siberia. So I think that's the thing that appeals to me, but also just the simplicity of it. You know, like I said before, you can, downhill skiing is different. You have to have a ski resort and it costs a lot of money. Cross-country skiing, you know, cross-country skis, there are fancy cross-country skis that are expensive, but you can also get, you know, free secondhand cross-country skis all over the place, or go to the Urban Ecology Center and, you know, borrow some. And then you can do it in the city, you can do it in the country, it's, yeah, on lakes. So it opens up worlds, like frozen lakes. You know, how many people have never been on a frozen lake that live in places where lakes freeze? Skis are a great way to explore frozen lakes. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think I just previously myself, I'm a very novice skier as well, or myself. And I think that just the feeling of being on those skis and kind of the way that, like you said, is harmonious. It's almost like it's meant to be a part of that, you know, instead of sometimes I feel very clumsy walking through the snow, and it's never always been my favorite thing, but being on skis, you can kind of have a different experience. And just in the classes I've been in, and being with other folks at the Urban Ecology Center who are a little bit more experienced or even more novice like myself, it kind of has that common ground of like, it lets you kind of be more of a part of nature. And that's really exciting. And I know that, like you said, you started skiing very young, 5 years old, I believe you said, when you took on that, the mini downhill. I love that part at the very beginning of your book, when you took on that little hill at your own will, and that was really awesome. What advice do you have for novice skiers, and rather they're looking at, you know, I want to go on a trip, a long journey like that, or I just want to kind of ski around in my neighborhood? What advice do you have for someone?
Like, so if someone wants to start cross country skiing, they've never done it before, I would just, and you know, and you just want to get a taste, I would say just, you know, find some secondhand boots and skis and poles. Those are the three things you need, and just go out there when it's snowy and like putz around, you know, and start to feel comfortable and stable on the skis. And you know, I've never had a ski lesson in my life. I mean, of course, they start younger, and it's easier to learn things when you're younger. But that's the beauty of cross country skiing. I mean, there's a lot of very refined technique in, you know, high level cross country skiing. But even bad cross country skiing is fun. So,
I can attest to that, because I feel like especially in the beginning, I did a whole lot of bad cross country skiing, but a lot of falling down.
yeah, I mean, and I don't think, I mean, all right, apart from this journey, I don't think that my cross country skiing is particularly good. I think that like a lot of people see this book, this guy, you know, trying to ski across Canada, and they must think that I'm this, you know, incredible skier. But if a lot of these people went skiing with me, they would think, what? He's not a very good skier. Skiing and hauling a 100-pound sled around is, of course, something completely different. There's not like a lot of kicking and there's a lot of kicking, but not very much gliding. You know, it's more like a slog. I mean, of course, it's faster than walking in deep snow, but it's not fast.
Understandable. So I'm going to read another question from the comments from Barbara. I think you touched on this a little bit, and it seemed that you might be hesitant to do it, but have you thought about doing a similar trip to your journey?
Again, in other words?
Yeah, so would you do this a similar trip again?
So, but if by similar the questioner means winter, in the winter, the answer is absolutely no. Absolutely no. But other long trips in other seasons, absolutely, yeah. But just the discomfort of winter and the pain, frankly, so much of the time, no, I have no interest in that. This is a one-off deal.
Definitely. M. Bousfield asked, what about waxless skis, such that you don't have to worry about the prep work?
Hello, M. Bousfield. Marjorie, I know who M. Bousfield is. Yeah, you know, there was a time in my life where I was like kind of a purist and thought that, you know, only waxed skis, you know, were the real thing. But the older I get, it's such a pain waxing skis, quite frankly. And so I would be surprised if I ever bought a pair of skis that's not waxless.
And I see she put it in the comments, I mean, for novices, to encourage just getting out there.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, waxing just adds another layer of complication for
a lot of slip. I'm sorry, go ahead, Anders.
No, I was just going to elaborate on that, but I don't think I need to.
Awesome. Another question, these are some wonderful questions in the comments from John. How did you handle, and this is a double question, how did you handle the loneliness? And did you dream at night in ways that are different from your usual? So yeah, were your dreams any different from during your journey?
Yeah. So the loneliness, yeah, I felt pretty intensely lonely a few times, and I would I have a few sort of meltdowns in the book where I'll just for no apparent reason. And I'm not, a super emotional person in my normal life. But I would just suddenly start crying for no apparent reason, and loneliness was part of it. So one thing is that I'm not a total hermit, but I'm not the most sociable person in the world. But as soon as I came into towns, I was sort of like proactively social, which is very unusual for me.
A little more outgoing.
Yeah. So that's that part. Dreams, I can't remember. I mean, I was so exhausted every night. I guess they say you always dream, but I can't clearly remember any dreams on the trail, to be honest.
I think I can imagine where that question would come from, because I thought about that as well. Like, I think a lot of people notice when you go like on a vacation or something, even though this is very different from a vacation, but if you go somewhere and you see new things and there's so much that your mind is processing, that a lot of the times you can reflect in your dreams, or you notice your dreams are more vivid, or sometimes maybe you don't dream at all. And I can imagine, like, with the exhaustion, that you probably just out like a light when you have those opportunities, especially if you're able to sleep somewhere a little warmer, peacefully. When you were sharing space with some of those characters.
Yeah, no, Amy, it's definitely an interesting question, and it's your point about using dreams to process new information. So I'm sure I dreamt, but unfortunately, I don't remember.
All right. So we were talking about the chapter Winter in your book, kind of centered around winter ecology and some of those thoughts and things that you thought a lot deeper about, being out there in such vast just whiteness and snow and all those things that you got to think about. So what were some of those like revelations or things that really got you thinking deeper about winter ecology while you were out there?
Yeah, okay. So a big one, the first one that comes to mind, and I touched on this a minute ago, is just like physically how we relate to winter. Those of us who live in wintry climes, we usually either retreat from it completely, or we just challenge it, like do these things that just fly in the face of what winter seems to dictate, like moving snow out of the way, spending vast amounts of time and energy. Like think of a city and it has this whole fleet of snow moving vehicles. Rather than thinking about, are there ways that we could move around, taking advantage of winter? Movement, humans are the only people that kind of stand around outside in the winter. And then we feel cold and complain about it. So that's another point in favor of skiing, is that it's a great way to stay warm when it's cold. There's a fairly elaborate metaphor in that chapter that you mentioned. It's actually kind of taken from the way that plants, certain northern tree types adapt to winter. Mm-hmm. And they use this sort of, they slowly, as the days become shorter every fall, their sort of cold hardiness slowly increases. And it's actually, they use it. There's something called a physical process called supercooling. I don't want to get too nerdy here, but that enables like bits of the tree itself to freeze to protect the most vital parts of the cell. So it's like thinking of it fancifully, it's almost as if like the trees die a little bit every year so that they can live longer. And so I see that as kind of it's sort of a paradox or in this ironic thing. And I see in that chapter I see a bunch of these little ways that winter works kind of ironically. So for example, snow protects things on the ground. It's this cold thing that falls on them, but it actually keeps them warm because it has insulating properties. And then the sun hits the snow, but because the snow is white, it throws the warmth back, which is another kind of ironic sort of thing, ironic seeming. We can imagine it as ironic. So there are lots of little things like that that, that cross your mind when you're out there living in the winter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know from a teaching standpoint, when the winter rolls around, it's always one of my favorite seasons to teach about winter ecology, specifically when it comes to animals. The kids always find that just fascinating. I find it fascinating, all of those ways that they just naturally adapt to the winter, whether it be migration, hibernation, or blending in camouflage with the snow. Were there any aspects of wildlife that surprised you or just kind of took your breath away when you were on your journey? Did you encounter any, well, again, try not to give anything away, but were there any moments that you did encounter wildlife while outside that just blew your mind, or do you think differently?
Yes, well, maybe blew my mind is a bit strong, but there most, I didn't see as much wildlife as you might imagine, like as much as you would see if you went in the summertime, again, because animals, like I would go out and ski regardless of the weather pretty much every day. I wanted to keep moving. Whereas animals, if there's nasty weather, they tend to hide in their dens or whatever, depending on the kind of animal. But of course, when you're out there for 4 months, you see animals. So I saw lots of moose and lots of, snowshoe hares and grouse and like things that you would expect to see. But the most thrilling sighting was of a fisher, which is, a larger member of the weasel family, in the mountains, quite high up in the mountains in very deep snow. When I was feeling very frustrated, it was, I think it was my second shortest day in terms of distance covered. I skied a couple of miles, just because the snow was so deep, and it was still early in the winter, so the snow was kind of damp as well. And my sled kept capsizing, and I was just feeling extremely clumsy and like thinking, I'm a human being. I'm not supposed to be out here, walking through this deep snow in the middle of the wilderness. And then this fisher, fishers are very graceful animals and sort of light. So it just kind of leapt lightly over the snow, without even thinking about it. And it was this contrast between that way of moving and my clumsy way of moving. And yeah, it was a nice moment, even though I felt like I wished that I were the fisher.
Awesome. I know we're getting a little closer towards the end now. I have another question here in the comments. I just wanted to make sure if anybody else had questions that they have for Anders or just in general for conversation, to put those in the comments now. But Suzanne had another question. She says, what was the most challenging about returning to civilization, and what was your coping experience in that regard?
My coping experience?
Yes, with coming back to civilization from being, isolated and everything you went through.
Yeah. Well, one thing about like you going on a solitary journey is that you are in charge of all your own time, and so you can become kind of selfish in a way, because you used to being able to do whatever you want whenever you want and doing everything at your own pace. There was a period, and I'm long past this now, but like when I would kind of get frustrated. I think I would get frustrated with other people because like I was in this habit of like thinking and acting really quickly. It's like making snap decisions all the time. And I got into that habit, and I brought that with me for probably close to a couple of years afterwards. And I would often get frustrated with people who were indecisive or, wouldn't like jump at doing a task immediately. Which is funny because I've always been an extremely indecisive person and have returned to being rather indecisive in many ways. But there's this period where I've often felt impatient with people. So those are two things that I think of.
I think you probably couldn't have afforded to be indecisive and during your journey when you have to make such quick in certain decisions. And I know in previous conversation you and I have had, you talked about, sometimes learning from those trails that you were taking while you were along, because sometimes you'd have clear marked trails and other times you kind of have to figure it out on your own. So how did you learn to trust those trails that you were on in that kind of decision-making process?
That's an excellent question. I like the word trust because that's really what you had to learn to do. You have to, so like, most long journeys that you read about are, well, either they're in like polar regions where there's no trail at all, or they're on, on long trails like the Appalachian Trail or something like that, where you have signs marking the way. But, going east to west across Canada where I was going across, there is no single trail. As I mentioned, I spent a lot of time looking at maps. And so my idea of what a trail was like a pretty malleable idea. I knew that I was going to be using lakes, frozen lakes in places like Saskatchewan and Manitoba. I knew that in some areas there were railroads that were not used very often, like one train a day would go by or something like that. And so I knew that these would be like these corridors through the forest that were covered in snow, perfect for skiing on. Other places there were networks of logging roads that weren't necessarily used all the time. And then in other links, I knew that I was going to have to kind of wing it. Like I could, follow the bed of a river, which is, actually quite problematic. It's hard to know what the bed of a river looks like from afar, or how the river is going to freeze. But I don't know. After a while out there, I just realized that at least where I was in the near north, it was like there were a surprising amount of people moving around in the forest, mostly on snowmobiles in the winter. And unlike probably in the far north, I was usually able to find some way, and it got to a point where I became quite confident that I would. And I came to see trails as like trail making as a thing, is this quintessentially human activity, which is evolved into other things like road making and so forth. But of course, I obviously have a preference for trails over roads. So the word trust that you use, it's like when people build trails, it's kind of like an act of, it's like a leap of faith. Like, that one person can only build so much trail, but that there are other people out there building them. And eventually these trails are going to come together and people are going to use them, and then they'll sort of be linked by use. And that's another chapter in the book is about trails. And there are a few reflections on winter trails in particular.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I can't, it's just so crazy again, thinking about, those journeys that you came across. And again, you're going to have to read the book, you guys, because this book is amazing. And one of those parts, I know that you one of the trails didn't, go so well as you were hoping. And it blows my mind just to think about, being in that moment and you can't really turn back. So, you have to stick with the decision that you made and just kind of learn, from the next time. And it's just amazing. Check it out, definitely. I also wanted to use this opportunity to briefly talk about the Urban Ecology Center for the next 4 Saturdays. Starting this Saturday, we have some free events coming up. This Saturday is ice skating at Washington Park. We have free hot chocolate and cider. If you've just been looking for a way to get outside with family, friends, it'll be socially distanced. Please wear a mask, but you can go to our website and check that out as well. So Anders, as we're wrapping up here, I guess one of my biggest questions is, what was one of your biggest takeaways? Because I'm pretty sure you've taken away multiple things from your journey, but what was one of the most valuable pieces that you learned from going on that journey?
There, as you say, there are many things, but the first thing that occurs to me actually, and since you just mentioned the Urban Ecology Center, and we've been talking a little bit about urban ecology, or we've touched on it briefly. One of the things I've learned, I guess I've learned from this journey, and I've since come to its joy, is exploring urban areas. Like, we mentioned trails a minute ago. Like I have a much broader sense of what constitutes a trail. Like a trail is sort of anything that gives passage to animals or human beings and other animals across a landscape. And so like cities are fascinating to explore. I mean, because it depends on how strictly you follow, like how what view you take of trespassing laws, I suppose. Not that I'm not advocating trespassing, but I mean, like if you try to sort of get off the beaten path, as it were, in a city, and just go places where you don't see other people, people tend to move in like ants, like we follow each other and follow the same patterns all the time. But cities, the closest large city to where I live, of course, is Boston. And we're fortunate to have this thing. It's called the Emerald Necklace, which is this network of parks, which goes all the way around the city. And it's like 7 or 8 miles, and you can walk around the entire city in downtown Boston, following kind of this green corridor. But apart from that, even leaving that, just kind of going, just start walking one day and like say I want to go in a straight line towards the west, and you'll see all sorts of interesting things and like pockets of little like mini microcosms of wilderness, like just people where people haven't walked, and a little patch of grass between 2 buildings. So I guess somehow it was I think from a contrast with this journey, in which I went to seek like kind of an opposite of that, I learned to appreciate that you don't have to to go to the opposite side of a continent and into the north to find places to go on interesting adventures.
Absolutely. And I think, again, that's one of our biggest takeaways at the Urban Ecology Center is that we, try to get people outside. And even though we are right in the inner city, there are those little pockets of places that we can go to enjoy nature and to really experience and have that time, because it is so important. And as we talked about before, I think a lot of people are realizing that now with the pandemic and having spent some of that time outdoors and what value that does bring to somebody. We have one more question in the comments from Susan. What is the one thing that you would had brought, or that you wish you would have brought with you? Is there anything that you didn't bring that you wish that you had brought? I would assume you're pretty prepared, but
yeah, I honestly I can't think of anything. Yeah, no.
Well, that's a good thing. Good thing you were prepared. Otherwise, things could have ended up pretty sticky.
I just want to say thank you, Olivia, for talking to me, and thank you, Daniel and Boswell Books, for the opportunity. I think the book is available for sale at Boswell if you're interested in getting a copy. And so if you're in Milwaukee, do that, or you can probably order it, I think, too, if you're not in Milwaukee, from Boswell.
You can probably get it just about whatever your favorite bookstore is. They will probably be able to get it for you. I wanted to also thank both of you. What a wonderful evening, and an honor to take part. So makes me want to go find my cross-country skis. Fortunately lost for a while, but and go out while there's still snow everywhere.
Oh yeah, we'll have it for a little bit, hopefully.
Yeah, I think so. Doesn't seem like it's getting out of the teens for another week. So.
Oh yeah, polar vortex. Here we go.
Thank you both, and have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming to the event. We wouldn't have an Urban Ecology Center or without.
Thank you, and thank you again, Anders. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good
sleep, Anders. It's late.
Bye-bye.